If you feel like you are losing your grip, might suffer a trip or abandon ship, open a can of whatever you sip and join the fellowship.
Hello there and welcome to the Fellowship of the Ring Pull, a weekly blether about matters music and music that matters. If you want to join the conversation and you're on YouTube, if you check out the video link down below, the video description down below, there's a link to a Google Meet. And whilst we have a lot of regulars who appear, it is open to anyone. So anyone, you don't need an invite, just come in, hit mute on your mic and stick your hand up. There's a little icon there to join in the conversation, ask questions, answer questions, join in the debate. And there may well be a debate today because I'm going to be a bit of a bad cop today. Excuse me, if truth be known. And I'll get to that in a minute. But I was wondering if any of you have heard about recent moves by UK record labels to make sure that writers are paid for the work that they do on Spec. And from what I can see, writers will get £75 daily plus expenses for songwriting sessions. Artists with pre-2000 record contracts can renegotiate better terms for streaming. Critics say the deal fails to fix streaming royalties. Well, it'll take a lot to fix those, with a further review expected next year. This is a bit of news that kind of, I guess it's silly season. It's passed a lot of people by. If you are in a record deal and you want to renegotiate, I would urge you to do so. But I think that it's artists like Ray who have really spoken out about the amount of work that we do on Spec. And from what I've witnessed, what tends to happen is you get often very wealthy producers working out of these big kind of campuses. Maybe Alan and Simon, you can check what plural of campus is. I'm sure it's not campuses. Campi. And thanks, Simon. And I think what is very, very common is Topliners tend to travel in because the producers tend to own the facilities, the equipment, the microphones, all of that kind of stuff. What happens is you get Topliners kind of traveling in, and more times than not, it's just the way that things have kind of currently work out with the music industry. Topliners, more often than not, tend to be women. And certainly where producers and track makers are concerned, there's definitely a disparity there. So many more male producers and track makers, as they're referred to. So what happens is you have these large kind of encampments with very smart cars outside. And these poor Topliners, I say poor by kind of literally poor Topliners, who are trying to get a song away, have to get public transport, often to, certainly within, the southeast, you're talking about getting to the home counties across London, this, that and the other. And they're expected to work on Spec. Often they'll have their lunch made for them. That's about it. But yeah, and as a consequence, there is also, sorry, I'm thinking while I'm talking. There is also this culture of when you write songs for artists, and it's something that Elvis's, is it Major Tom? It's Elvis's manager introduced that there's this thing called change a word, take a third, whereby if you write a song for a famous artist, they will automatically demand some of the publishing. There's a track out at the moment by a female artist, and it has 14 writers on it. Now, if you think about if that track generates £100,000 of publishing income, often these songwriting published successful individuals, they will take control of the publishing. So just scoop away 50%, leaving 50%. Now divide that by 14 people. So this song has generated 100 grand, which is amazing. But this person, this artist or this songwriter who's been working on Spec, getting public transport, you know, is going to walk away with £6,000 or £7,000, which is not enough to sustain you between the very rare occurrence that you have a radio hit or a sync hit, that kind of thing. So anyway, it'd be very interesting to talk to you about your experiences of being expected to work on Spec, whether that's as a topliner, as a track maker, as a media composer, working for student films, working on commercial films. That thing when you're just trying to get your foot on the ladder and you are starving yourself to get anything in, and you're expected to work for free, yet when you're further up the ladder you're compensated royally. Like to hear your thoughts on that. Right, the bad bit. We do composer challenges here at Crow Hill, and the idea is to try and give you guys a real life experience of what it's like to pitch. I guess it's kind of pitching blind often. Sometimes we provide footage and stuff like that, but it's kind of pitching blind for jobs. This is part of media composition. And for the bigger jobs, there are really like big composers who find themselves having to pitch. And something that we try and engineer into people taking part in these challenges is the importance of following a brief. Now, a few weeks ago, we set a challenge for our latest Volts release. Volts are free instruments that we release every month. And it's this kind of pizzicato effect, but done on a guitar. And my suggestion was to people to try and refresh the trope that has been really dominated by pizzicato strings since the 1990s. And I suggested possibly the beginning of that whole trope was Thomas Newman's score for 6 Feet Under, that then kind of morphed into this impossible for live players to play pizzicato style that accompanies reality TV, particularly daytime reality TV. And I was wondering whether people taking part in the challenge could refresh that trope with a different sound. 40 people have entered, which is a hell of a lot, and we really appreciate your effort here. But I'm sorry to say, giving you a real life experience of what it's like out there, no one met the brief. I've listened to every single one of the tracks, and there seems to be, you know, I remember what it was like to be, you know, when I first started with this technology and this, that, and the other. What happens is the compositions, you know, the technology, the theory of composition, and the technology tends to kind of draw you off brief by you being stimulated by this TV is about to go on standby, so I don't know if someone can hit a remote control. Whether you are being stimulated by the quality of composition or production that you're doing, or indeed you're finding it difficult to really analyze the brief and articulate it in your own mind into a workflow and an output that matches the brief. Sometimes the briefs are bad. You know, talking about music is difficult, and often the briefs that are given are you know, given by people who have zero musical means of articulating what they want musically. I remember once doing an advert where they said they wanted it to sound like the theme tune to Mr. Oiseau, a rave track, and a carnival song from South America, but also a little bit like Blade Runner. And you're like, how on earth do I interpret that? And I think the key is to think about what are the standout elements that you think are likely to have resulted in them giving you such a disparate selection of references. Is it going to be the jazz saxophone in Blade Runner? Unlikely. Is it going to be the Quaker, that thing? That'll be the last time I impersonate that South American percussion instrument. From festival music, it's possibly the energy, the some interesting drums, etc. etc. I'm waffling, but basically what's happened with this challenge is we feel it would be unfair to reward anyone if the brief hasn't been met, and this is one of these unique situations where we feel that no one has met the brief. And yes, that might be because the brief is loose or we've not put it very well, but that's a real world challenge that we're setting for you. So, with regrets, and it's not us being stingy, I'm going to prove that in seconds. With regrets, we're going to extend the competition by 10 days. There will be details presented in the video description down below and attached to the original post on our resources section, composer challenges at thecrowhillcompany.com. We're going to extend the period asking people to resubmit, and I would just urge you to have a real think about the brief. And okay, we may not have presented you with examples, but there's plenty of stuff that you can look at online. It's something that started in the 90s, but has been prevalent up to modern day. I would suggest things like Ramsey's Kitchen Nightmares. What we're looking for is a bit of doing music. And something that I've observed about reality TV and what they do with the music is they manipulate you into thinking that you're possibly the only person who has noticed the people on screen are idiots. And there's some kind of comfort in you thinking you're the only person to know that. Number of times when The Apprentice first started in this country, people would speak to each other down at the pub and go, I'd overhear it all the time, people going, do you know what, those people on The Apprentice, I think they're fucking idiots. And of course, the program makers know this, and the music is manipulating you to feel this. But it's been done very deadpan. There's no canned laughter, this, that, and the other. No kind of whoopee cushion sounds and all of that kind of stuff. So that's what we're looking for. Light, underscore, be careful of the themes, because sometimes themes really interfere with dialogue. So we're not looking for composer chops. We're looking for quality of production, yes, but also something that fits brief. And that's what always impresses me more than anything, is if we give a brief and someone meets it, which is the music that you heard at the beginning of this podcast by Ed Harper. It was so on brief because he got inside the spirit of this podcast, and I couldn't imagine any other music to usher us in. So, apologies for the bad news, but we're not being stingy. Instead of offering, was it 2 of our next major releases, Simon? I'm going to extend that to 3. So for your extra effort, it's not a rebrief. I've made some clarity there, and that's probably what would happen with clients, is if no one met the brief, they would farm it out again and go, clarification, here's a couple of references, this is what we're looking at. Watch out for themes, it's underscore, light, mischievous, and if you imagine some people doing something quite serious, but they're idiots, what music would you put underneath that was plucky, using this waltz instrument, but not pizzicato? Right. Something we can talk about on this podcast alongside this idea of working for Spec. So let's invite people gathered in and say hello to everyone. So lovely to see. Oh, look, I love how, look at that. I'm going to go off forever in the distance there on this podcast alongside. So, Moy always has something going on in the background that I find fascinating. And I'm looking forward to my face becoming smaller as you guys join, which is fantastic. Just to let everyone know that in line with one of the other challenges that we did, I've done 2 three. I'm not calling them master classes. I'm calling them imposter classes because I feel like a total imposter fiddling around with other people's MIDI files. But I've done. We did a multilingual imposter class with a composer who definitely isn't an imposter out in France, based in Paris, and also we did one today with Ellery. Based on the pocket strings challenge that we did. And in fact, as a format, I think it could prove to be really useful. So I look forward to editing those together and seeing what you think. And if you like them, we can repeat that. So, Idris, I haven't seen you for a while. How have you been? Patch Bay. We should do a compilation of musicians trying to get sound out.
I'm in.
You're in.
No patch bay. Nice to see you again, Christian.
And you,
it's been a whirlwind for me. Past 3 weeks. Unfortunately, my uncle passed, so there was all of that. And then I've been on 2 scores at the same time, so it's been quite heavy. I have managed to stay up with the fellowship though. This space has been very. For me, it's been very therapeutic because we do talk about things you can't talk about with anyone, and I think like it's the only place you can come for me so far where I can get this. So I appreciate. So I do watch every single episode. I was gutted to miss Steve Mazimo's one, but yeah, I'm here, man, and still doing stuff.
I'll talk us through how you found working on 2 scores simultaneously. I'm being a total tart. I'm not saying that you are, Idris, but being a total tart, I'm not a stranger to it. But it presents, I don't know, can I just state what the thing that I find hardest is possibly assuring the client that they're getting your full attention where possibly you are stretched.
Yeah. So for me, I've been, because they're short films, I'm being quite upfront with that fact that and obviously to do with clients is budgets and time constraints. I usually, if they're not paying me up to like a month or 3 months worth of like actual work, I'll probably just be like, okay, I'm gonna have to take on another job so that they're aware. I think that's the best for me anyway. At this level, it's the best thing to do. Obviously at features, that's almost impossible. But with short films, I think I've got quite got good with taking on only 2. I can't do more than 2 at once because obviously there's also the bleed of your scores start to sound like you're making 1 score, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm pretty careful of making sure that they're similar in case that happens, right? So for instance, these 2 shorts they're very one's actually from what's the place called again? Lebanon, and then one's in England, but they're very Suspiria-esque. I don't know if you're familiar.
Oh yeah, amazing score.
Suspiria.
Was that Beltrami?
Yeah. I'm not too sure who did the score. But
Suspiria, no, Goblin. Sorry, yeah.
Oh yeah, correct. Those films, they're very similar. They're like horror type of sleazy niche type stuff, both of them. So they both require a type of rock that is under yeah, so very, very dark, kind of like almost a satanic rock in a way. I kind of call it. I'm having fun, but yeah, then my uncle passed, and so there was that whole thing. So it kind of did post-production for a while. But yeah, in general, I feel as though, like you said, Christian, it can be heady, and I've got quite careful because also if it's very demanding, even if it's 1 short film, I wouldn't take on 2 because I think it's quite demanding.
Yeah,
but good to see one.
No, I think honesty is the best policy, but it is. There's a few things actually I think it's probably quite important to talk about in this respect. Directors are quite sensitive souls by and large, and you've got to make them feel really loved and that they're the most important thing in your life. So if you're being honest about possibly working on another job, and quite quite often it'll not be your fault. It'll be post-production has slipped, or they had a bit of a rainy time and production has slipped, or it's crunched, or, you know, these things happen all the time. And I think that one of the real dangers is saying, don't worry, I don't give a fuck about the other thing. Because that's also like, okay, so at the next gig I get you, are you not going to give a fuck about that gig if you're working on a Spider-Man sequel? So often with myself, there will be franchises, and something you can say with franchises is these things I work on very quick because we have a relationship and an understanding, and you know, I really know how to get high quality stuff for them because we have that understanding. But you have to be very, very careful also about talking too much about the other production, because that makes directors very nervous, particularly if you're trying to placate a director by going, oh, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Because it means that there's a kind of a client privilege that you are breaking as well. So I think it is a real tightrope. My record is I was 15 projects deep once. And there were 3 assistant directors, all with the name John. And they'd all go, hi, it's John from the cutting room. And you just go, how do you say which production without kind of letting on? And the problem is I used to fib and lie about... and one of the reasons why I used to take so much work on is that, and I don't want to come across as an angel here, but... I believe passionately in using live musicians because it simply makes your music sound much, much better than it actually is. It makes life a lot easier. And therefore, the kind of upfront fees I would really chip away at. And whilst we, you know, rely on back end, particularly when you're working on smaller films, there's no guarantee there's going to be any back end because, you know, I've worked on what I thought were massive, you know, like Black Death with Sean Bean, and, you know, it's a big 12 million, you know, which is big for Britain, big 12 million budget, and it showed at 3 cinemas, you know, and you think, well, I'm not going to get any back end from that. So it's a bit of a tightrope. It's not very good for the head, and I wouldn't recommend it. But you have to be really diplomatic. And often what will happen, I find, with directors is you can tell them once that I'm just finishing off this other job, or, they just need a few cues from me because they're earlier on in the process. And then I think directors prefer it if you just never then mention it again. Because it's like it's not in your mind. When you're with them, you're with them. So, and, you know, things like I'm really knackered because they kept me up all night, you know, working on this. I have heard a story from a composer, A-list Oscar-winning composer, who had dubbing dates which were on the same day, and their assistant mixed up what was delivered, and they laid up all of this stuff to picture. It was a totally different style of score. One of the productions ended up firing the composer because it was like, well, this is an Oscar-winning composer, they've got it totally wrong. And then the other film preferred the score that they had supplied. So there we go. Yeah, just like you wake up in the middle of the night, and I imagine for music supervisors, absolute nightmare. So other things that we're talking about today is, I don't know if you've heard that there's been some legislation in the UK to actually make sure people get some minimum earnings for working on Spec, and would love to hear of your stories of working on Spec and how, when we're poor, we're expected to work for free, and when we maybe have got a few pennies in the bank or have bought a house, suddenly we're commanding these fees, and how we feel about that. And particularly with, in particular case of these kind of collaborative sections of the music industry, where you're working with people who are, you know, turn up in a Porsche 911, and you're expected to get on Southwest trains and peak time and pay for your tickets, and this, that, and the other, and work on Spec. We'd be very interested to hear about that. And I don't know if you guys heard, but I've also given the bad news that we're extending the latest Composer Challenge because we felt that the brief wasn't met. And one of the biggest challenges when you're starting out is to hit brief. And we feel it would be unfair to reward someone just simply because they wrote a good piece of music. So we're inviting people to have another go, but we're also increasing the prize by 50% of kind of perceived value. So that's what we're doing here. So I don't know if anyone's got any thoughts on working for Spec. Kent, how are you today?
Oh, doing well. I'm actually in a very similar situation to Idris, although it's 2 features and 1 short. So mine's so they're all at different times though. It's funny. It's like one gets done. Well, the current schedule is one gets done just shy of a week before the other one starts, and then that one gets done just shy of a week before the other one starts. But right now, 2 of them are starting to bleed together because, as Christian mentioned, post-production kind of slipped by them, and they sort of forgot about the fact that I need an edit and spotting session. So what's happening is that the 2 features are kind of bleeding together as to when they start. So that's fun. But they're horror, but they're different kinds of horror. One is like satanic, and the other one is more bluesy and kind of Bayou level horror. So one uses guitar, one is everything else. So we're good there. But I wanted to talk about the brief though, because I have a really funny story about working for brief. I won't name names, but there was a big studio, the biggest, one of the big studios, one of the big 5. I'll just leave it at that. But I was in a position to pitch for a film. They had stumbled across me in some way, and they wanted me to pitch. I ended up collaborating with a composer friend of mine because it was through his publicist that all this came to be. So we came together and we pitched a brief. And the brief was, this was a horror movie that wanted to explore like Irish folklore. And Irish folklore is a big interest of mine, none the least of which being a 3rd-generation Irish American, but due to the fact that I love that whole thing. That's why Solstice is my favorite Spitfire library. So we came together and we ended up taking a lament poem that is an old Irish lament about a woman who drowns her baby. We took the Gaelic of it, and we just put one phrase, and we just had that as a loop, as like this spiraling melody and all this crazy stuff. And we followed the brief like to the T. We sent that in. We didn't hear anything from them, and the publicist then went back and sort of double checked. And they loved the thing that we sent. They'll get back to us. We ended up not getting the gig. Went to somebody else, which is totally fine. We were then curious, and we saw the film. The film score went into a completely different direction. I mean, to the point where we were like, "Well, hold on, they're in the woods." That there is some folklore stuff, but why is the score going? I mean, the score is great. It's not any dig at the composer, but what in the flying heck is this? So yeah, that's my brief story.
Oh, it is so remarkably common. There's a couple of things I wanted to pick up on there. There was one. I had a friend who was kind of cleaning up on computer games probably about 15 years ago, and he'd been working on this franchise, and suddenly he lost the franchise to another composer who he also knew. He bumped into him into the street, and he went, "You nicked that gig off me. What's this all about?" You know, he was kind of upset but being playful. You know, this is fair in love and marriage and all of that stuff. And basically, this guy who had not nicked the gig, who had got the gig, said, "Come with me." Took him up to his studio and showed him that he'd employed an orchestra and a camera crew, including a crane shot, and had invested probably about £15,000, so $20,000 in this pitch. And I think that when you're looking at these massive franchises, you have to be aware that some of these bigger composers and bigger compositional houses and teams actually take tendering quite seriously, like you get in bigger kind of corporate work. And that's something to be aware of. And I think that there are ways of doing that, going the extra mile with your pitch, that don't necessarily involve huge amounts of investment, but can, again, familiarize people with who you are. Something that I've been doing, I've definitely won a few pitches by having my YouTube channel. Gets down to me and another composer. They can't decide between us. They just feel they know me better. And you're always, on a human level, going to go with someone that you feel and you know. But actually, I'd say on the last 2 really big commissions that I've got, I made them a video. And I made them a track live on the video. And as always, just sampled a wine glass, did some funny stuff with it, whacked loads of fucking reverb on it, and off I went. Something that's interesting is being introduced into the process, and I don't know if any of you have experienced this, is on one of those gigs, they then requested a chemistry meet. And what they mean by that is personality chemistry. And the fact that basically there was an interview, there was a pitch, and there was a chemistry meet. I would say those were given equal importance. And what I did for the chemistry meet is I actually got on a plane and flew to LA to meet them in person. And I just said, I don't like Zoom meetings and stuff. And it genuinely, it wasn't because of the money that I'd spent and the effort that I'd gone to stimulated their codependency streak. This is a really major, major job. It was though helpful that I could be there in person, because this is not the same as we know it. Another pitch story that I have is one of the first jobs I did as a solo composer. I started out in this game working with someone, and the first job I did as a solo composer, and the only job I've ever done this with, I got drunk to do the pitch because I was so nervous. And so drunk I blacked out, sent the pitch off, and listened to it the next day and just went, this is absolutely mental. Rang up my agent, went, can you get it back? And they went, no, it's gone. And this is the day of jiffy bags and couriers, motorcycle couriers. It had gone. And a few hours later, got the gig. And what was really embarrassing is they mixed up the master recordings. So on series 2, it was me singing Pissed in a blackout. And it was, I don't know, Idris, maybe you remember this series, 2 pints of lager and a packet of crisps?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I would have been 15 years old.
I thought you might be the right age.
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of my favorite shows actually at the time, because it's extremely funny. Yeah. And you're right, Christian. Actually, the title music was like nothing anyone had ever seen before. It's like every other title music, they make a big show of what you're about to see, right? And that was the natural way of doing it for a very long time until that show. And then I think after that show, especially where Britain was concerned, everyone started to try to be a bit more like two pints of lager and a packet of crisps, which is very interesting, because you then see a streak of series that were almost like spin-offs of that in a way, and it's like they tried to get the same energy. I think like the It Crowd and things like that, they all have a spirit that comes from 2 pints of lager and a packet of crisps. It's actually insane. Yeah, I do remember that.
Yeah, what it was I decided that it would be a good idea to do like Fatboy Slim Breakbeat and the Specials, like Scar, with me pretending to be Ian Dury screaming over the top, Pissed. So series 2, if you check it out, that's actually me in a blackout singing. I'm not proud of this at all. And at the end, there's a burp. And the way I did the burp is by drinking 3 large cans of beer. And I did this burp and vomited all over it was an Audio Technica 4033, and the mic survived, but it wasn't popular with singers that I was working with because it stank like the back of a London cab after a Saturday night. The reason I bring this up, though, is that this series was a huge success, and very, very rarely for Britain, they made, I think it was something like 115 episodes of this. It ran for about 10, 15 years. Actually, there's two stories I really want to tell from this because it's quite important. I had a great relationship with the producer, great relationship with the director. They felt that the music was a very important part of the brand of the show. They thought that it really kind of it stamped its mark because it was mental and it wasn't me going, I'm going to try and do something that sounds like it's in the charts, because I was too old even at that point to try that. It was kind of timeless. So it ran and ran and ran and ran and ran. And during this successful run and then winning all of these awards, they put out another cattle call brief for a new series that exactly the same team were making. And they invited me to pitch. And the brief was, we want it to sound exactly like 2 pints of lager and a packet of crisps. So I thought, well, I was really upset because it was just like, well, can't you just book me? I got out the same samples that I used, same attitude. I didn't get drunk, though, and I didn't get the gig. So there we go. But little story from that. In this day and age, I know you cannot avoid it in the States, but what is completely illegal but is commonplace is that when you win a pitch, you get coerced, if you want the gig, to giving away your publisher's share. So publishing is divided into two halves. Well, into two, not rights. It's divided into two. It's what the publisher gets for publishing, looking after the royalties, this, that, and the other, and policing it, and then the writer's share. The legal minimum as a writer or writers that you can get is 50%. As a matter of course, all of these independent TV companies and production companies have their own publishing companies, or they have a publishing deal with a Warner or whatever, and they coerce you into giving away your publisher's share. Otherwise, you don't get the gig, which is totally illegal, but it's just commonplace. In America, it's not illegal. With the BBC, they're not allowed to do that because they have to follow the line of the law. So what the BBC did is they have a commercial wing, which used to be called BBC Worldwide. They offered me £1,000. So the original commissioning fee was £700. You know, and this is like 6 episodes. You don't know if this thing's going to run. And they offered me £1,000 for 50% of the, of the publishing. Now, if I'd self-published, I would have got maybe 95% of that publishing. If I'd published through my agent, I would have got 80% of that publishing, not 50%. But I said to my agent, I want to take the deal because, 1, I don't think this series is going to run, and 2, I need the money. I calculate that over the period of 12 years that thing ran, I lost probably next to £150,000 in royalties because I know how much I was getting, and it was 50%. Now, 150 grand sounds like a huge amount. You divide that by 12, 13, 14 years, it's not something you can live off. Double that, it becomes something that maybe stops you taking on 15 jobs at a time. So a letter of warning there. And you're absolutely right, Idris. We're talking about stuff that I'm basically never going to work again. Being way too honest here. So I don't see any hands up, unless I'm mistaken. Am I looking at the right thing? Yeah, no hands up. That's fine. Nick, how are you doing, sir?
Hey, since there were no hands, I'll ask. Where's the mic, Christian? Where's that mic with the throw up and all of that stuff on it? It should go on auction or something. The latest Assassin's Creed and all of the Horizon Zero Dawns, they're using that mic.
I gave it to my brother. There you go, mate.
Okay. There's DNA there.
Yeah. My brother is one half of the Flight, who are the most successful computer games composers at this time in the UK. And they're remarkably frugal when it comes to... and they record so much in this place that sounds terrible, but they just worked out how to use it. And they just swear by... Oh, yes, that means before she recorded her first album, Lana Del Rey recorded 6 songs singing into the vomit mic. There you go. No wonder they didn't use them.
Yeah, this is worth a documentary, really. You know, like a feature length documentary scored exclusively through that mic. Also.
Yeah. I don't know if my brother's talked about this, and he may kill me for saying this, but I remember him saying to her, because she was doing like dancey stuff, he said, you should like try and do something that's more like Quentin Tarantino meets David Lynch. I remember that being my brother's suggestion, and that's her brand. So he very much helped to develop her, but she probably didn't like the vomit mic. That's probably what it was. There we go. Dex, how are you doing? I don't believe we've spoken before, have we?
We haven't, but I have followed you since walking up Crow Hill in COVID. That's how I found you the first time, but there you go.
Yeah, those were the days.
Yeah, I was just thinking back to your comment about musicians not being paid for what they're worth, and I was just thinking back to, and this isn't an advert for them, but places like Musiversal,
right?
Who you
to expand on that?
To, sorry,
you may have to expand. I've not heard of that. You may have to expand on that.
So Musiversal, you book musicians to perform a piece that you composed, and you have to send them the score. And a friend of mine happened to be a member, which was a cello player. I had to obviously convert the MIDI into score, sent it to them. They recorded it completely offline, sent it back. Amazing.
Yeah.
What a brilliant result. And they're paid an annual salary. So it's not as quickly as they can do it. They're paid per session that they do. And the result was amazing. So this isn't an advert. I'm just saying it's a service that's out there, and musicians are finding this as a really good way of earning an income. Like you were saying about Topliners, you can get Topliners on there as well, but they are specifically putting themselves out there to put their music out there for you as an individual.
That sounds very interesting, and I think that maybe that you've inspired a video. I should maybe try it and see what the experience is like. It sounds like something that musicians have to be so careful about being honest about the deals and stuff. I mean, there's a culture, I'm sure that you're aware, that one of the best sketches ever performed on UK television is Morecambe and Wise with Andre Previn. If you haven't seen it, Google it. And there's a reference to the fixer. And they say, I can tell you're the fixer. You're in the gold lame suit. There's something slightly, maybe not in this day and age, but there was something slightly gangstery about fixers. You had to keep in with them. You had to put up with the stuff, and you would never, ever complain about a fixer because you'd never get fixed again. But it would be interesting to get some anonymous views from musicians on the kind of levels of earnings they're getting and how that would compare to regular session work. But I maintain that we're all part of this kind of collective ecoverse, and I think it's really, we really should use live musicians. It's going to be a moot point over the next few years, because everyone is going to be asking for stuff that doesn't sound like it's AI. I absolutely guarantee it. Idris, back to you.
Yes, thank you, Christian. I just want to touch on what Dex mentioned. They're actually based in Budapest. They have a different. I think they use the Budapest Radio Orchestra. They use a different. They have different laws out there, which basically mean that they can do. I think John Powers actually used them on several of his stuff, Musiversal. They have him on the site. And it didn't go through, but I was working on a trailer, which I was a trailer track, for King Kong, which I wanted to pitch, and I was going to use Musiversal also. I didn't use it in the end because I didn't get the thing. But yeah, I think it's to do with their laws, and that allows for them to offer such a service where you basically are booking an orchestra by the minute. Right, and but they kind of turn up like 9 to 5 to the places. I think I'm correct in that, and Dex, and then they do the thing. I'm sure it's not 9 to 5 because that's a bit much for an orchestra. But there is something in that regard, and I think you're right, Christian. That would make a very good video. I don't know if that is something that we can do in the UK and maybe in America, but because I think our laws are a little bit different. But I think it's based on where they're from that gives them that little loophole or leeway. But they use all around the world. People use their stuff. So I think Dex raised his hand on. Oh, but we have before.
Yeah. Sorry, Dex.
I was going to say I've used it in the UK and got a great result from a cello player who was based in the UK. So they're using the service, and I'm in the UK. They just did it in their own time.
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't a whole orchestra.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've actually worked in that concert hall in Budapest, and it's really bizarre. It's like a Spinal Tap thing, because it's a pyramid that's totally the wrong way around, and it's like some architect. I just imagine them kind of drawing it on a thing and not actually turning the paper around. Yeah, it's like this. Bizarre. It's got a great organ in it, though. Idris, you picked up on something very interesting. And yes, the union laws are much, much tighter in this country, but they're much tighter for productions that are based in this country. So when productions come from abroad, they're not bound by the same agreements. There are some basic union stuff that simply they won't work. But a good example of that is library music in this country until recently, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you couldn't buy the musicians out for use of their performances for library music if the library music was used as titles on a titles track for a TV show. But if the library company was based in America, it wasn't bound by the same set of rules. So often what you'll find people doing is, another thing, I don't know if you're aware of this, I'm sure some of you are, but basically American orchestras get a cut of gross. So I think it's something like 2% of gross, like that's box office, goes to the orchestra. And which is one of the reasons why Americans come over here, because obviously we don't do that. A friend of mine did a score, and basically you have to use an LA-based orchestra if something like 80% of the crew is based in LA or it's shot in LA. And a friend of mine did a film. I won't try and give it away. A friend of mine did a film that was a relatively low budget film, and it was done in a single location in LA, but LA dressed as New York, and 50% of the score was totally synth, no live players. And the film was a hit, and he said he'd never seen checks like it, just coming through every month. And because of the kind of dodgy accounting of these film studios, that's the reason why they get gross. So whatever they show as box office, they get 2% of. So I'm probably twisting the actual figures and whether that still is in existence, but that's as I understand it. Kent.
There's a lot that I could say, but on the terms of like musicians, you know, getting paid what they're worth, it just, on the short film, I had to have a conversation with a producer that I've never talked with producers before. Usually or at least in my stage of career development, it's pretty much always been director. Producer has been more of the introducing us and then just completely goes away and I don't ever hear from them ever again. This short film is completely different in that I'm more so talking to the producer than I am with the director, which that's been bizarre. But we were talking about budget, and the director has been very clear that he's wanted live musicians. Well, I do know that the budget for this film is particularly what it is, so we could at least afford one musician, which for me, that's usually Alice, because I usually go for her for pretty much every single one of these things. But it turned into a 15-minute conversation, which would have been 3, because he asked what were the budgets for music, and I gave him what the budgets were, which was basically her rates. He then tried to say that that's hard to justify when other members of the crew are getting paid this, and this. And I ended up getting him by going, well, it's no different than renting equipment. The difference is my equipment is people, not a camera. But I have to pay this person what it is. I mean, she can be as flexible as to a degree if budgets are tight, but that's as low as she can go while still making something of it and still going on and doing her thing. And then that's when he was like, oh, I didn't realize that. I'm like, didn't realize that? It's you're basically hiring a cinematographer, only I'm not using a camera. I'm using people. These are my equipment.
Yeah. And those people are using very, very expensive equipment. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Moy, how are you?
Hey, I hope everybody's doing okay. I'm doing all right. I actually heard of Dax was mentioning a music versal, I think it is. Yeah, so basically you pay $200 and you have access to all these musicians, guitarists, beat makers, music producers, sound engineers, and all you do is pay $200. I looked into it, it seems rather interesting. But I do have a story about microphones. We used to sing in church, and the microphones really stunk, like it had bad smell, like really bad smell. So what I did, I took a deodorant, those you put under your arms, and I put in all the microphones so they would smell better. And they did, as a matter of fact. So my father, being the pastor of the church, he was looking into it, and it had an odd color in it. So he started looking at all these microphones, and he said, what is this? And he just, stopped picking at it. And he says, it looks like wax. But, I never told him, even before his death. So, that's a little story about, you can always do that. But, your under arm, deodorant, it will smell a lot better. But what I wanted to say is sometimes when you have budgets, you had this movie Cognition, they spent $700,000, and they had Oscar nominated, I think, composer, and they had a really good budget. They had the BBC orchestra, I believe, the radio orchestra, and they had Guinness Book of Records, really good budget. But we still were able to overpass them with only $8,000 as budgets of film production. But what I wanted to ask you, Christian, is the fact that I worked with the one producer in LA, Walter Afanasiev. Some of the most annoying songs, All I Want for Christmas Is You, and everybody hates that in Christmas. But he was saying when he did a song for Ricky Martin, which was She Bangs, that budget was $300,000. But the song ended up spending $800,000 as a budget. and he never got paid. So in was this singer Chinese guy called William Hung. He, you know, they did an American Idol, and he was there singing "She Bags, She Bags." You know, it became very successful. So the song was a hit all over again. So he said, Walter said, you know, I made all that money that I lost in that production 10 years later. So what I wanted to ask, is that really possible? You do a production and then years later, you finally make that money. I mean, anyone had that, you know, experience or anything in that particular?
I've witnessed really horrible things in that respect. I've met Walter. He's a lovely guy.
Afanasio,
Yeah.
Cool guy.
I think that protecting your rights is really, really important, but also understanding what the rights are. I've always maintained that rights are so complicated on purpose. And I think that when we're young and hungry, we're so willing to give these things away. I've witnessed someone very close to me try and get their rights back, and it's absolutely miserable. I don't know if you guys heard about recently the Verve, who used a sample from a cover version of a Rolling Stones track. And ABKCO, the Rolling Stones representatives, just took 100% of that song, and it was Bittersweet Symphony. And they only got those rights back. And, you know, to add insult to injury, they didn't back pay, you know, which is incredible, really. I don't know about productions, but I just think that it is really, really important to try and protect your rights. And I think one of the best stories is Dolly Parton. She wrote "I Will Always Love You," and Elvis wanted it, but his manager said, you know, Elvis takes 50%, you know, even if he doesn't change a word and take a third, you know, he just gets 50% of the publishing. And she just knew it was an absolute banger of a song, and she said, you know, this is my kids' education, this is potentially my you know, my retirement and all of that kind of stuff. And I think she had to wait something like 20 years until Whitney Houston covered it. And then it became this immense hit. So, I mean, you know, she's a savvy businesswoman. We know that. But it's difficult to protect your rights when you're hungry. But I would urge you to do so wherever possible. And, you know, invite anyone else to come in with some ideas there. Back to you, Moy.
Yeah. And even every year, there's a huge fight between him and Mariah Carey, who actually wrote the song. So every year, you know, it's ka-ching for him and them both, but there's always a fight. Who really did the song? Who really wrote the song? Who came up with this, with that? I mean, I have a lot of fun reading all these, you know, articles about them. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean...
But go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, you only need to look at what Ed Sheeran's been through, which is just a series of claims against his songs. I'm not a massive fan of his work, but, you know, he writes stompbox loop music, you know, so it's a lot of rock squares and that kind of stuff that are designed to work with a looping pedal. And, you know, he just keeps on, people kind of go, oh, I've got something that has similar inversions. And you can see it's absolute, he's put through absolute agony. And what's interesting is for these record companies, everyone knows each other who works in these record companies. It's a bit of a sport for them. And it's almost a bit like the casinos, like the house always wins, you know. And yeah, I think it can be absolutely devastating. And I think there are a few cases of huge heroic I've got a zin in, which means I can't say ours. That's a new thing. Heroic successes like Claire Torrey, who sang that famous top line in Dark Side of the Moon for Pink Floyd. But those kind of victories are few and far between. And in fact, I think something that Ed Sheeran did, which is quite clever, is he took his parlor guitar into the courtroom and he played the chords of this song, and he sang about 20 songs that had this same chord sequence.
Yeah.
But it's it's a total minefield out there. And I know that Ed Sheeran and a lot of songwriters now run cameras whilst they're writing, and even when they're writing alone, to prove the process they went through to write it, and that they have a right to those rights. Merlin.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, I wanted to chime in on that because like Kent and Moy both brought up budgets, which I think figure into the second thing that you said just now really well. So from the side of like, yes, maybe being hungry and like, you know, fresh to the game, I think protecting rights is one thing, but I think the other thing is how we think about budgets, because it's like, you can think of like, you know, if your goal is to do this as like something that maybe eventually you can pay your bills from, like so many mentioned, like with orchestra musicians, or it doesn't matter what role you have, you will eventually have a budget in mind. And this is just what you need to make every month or so, you know, so that you keep your head above water. And interestingly enough, I feel like often we get approached by whoever our clients are, directors or musicians or whatever it is, and they have a budget in mind already, not even knowing what your rates are, or not even knowing what you need to make a living. And I would go even further and say, like what was hinted at, I think a lot of people don't even have any clue what we do, how much time it takes, what's involved, you know, what equipment, what education, everything that's needed. And so I started thinking about, well, if people come to me and they want me for a project, they should pitch to me instead of me to them if they have a budget that they want me to fulfill, in the sense that, and I often share this, like, and the people like I work with or will potentially work with say, look, you have a project and you were on a tight budget, and I understand why that is maybe the case, but you really want me, and so you have to give me a reason to work basically for spending my own savings in that time. So either this project needs to be really cool and I need to really want my name on it, or really be behind the cause, or really, you know, something that gives me a reason to say, okay, part of what I need to make, I will pay out of my own pocket so I can meet your budget. And, you know, I'm not sure if that's going to catch on. I don't think so, but it would be nice if it did. And the other side of it is that I think as much as YouTube and the internet has become a great place for people showing what it actually is that we do, you know, whether it be musicians or producers or DJs or composers or any of the people who normally don't get seen up front by the end consumer. I still have several cases that I can think of where I think it's just ignorance about what goes into what we do. My story for working on Spec is a tiny story. There was a person, met them online on a job board. They wanted a song produced. They said it was all going to be like unofficial, anything. It's just for them to sing on, basically a private project, right? I responded to their message and I was like, okay, look, what is it that you need, and tell me about it, and what were you thinking to pay? And I think in the end it was like 20 quid or something. So it was really, you know, not work in that sense. But I was willing to do it, and I had some time, and I put a couple of quick sort of background songs together that somebody could sing on based on the brief this person had given me. And they paid me, and I said, look, do you want to put this online somewhere? Because if so, I will, you know, write you a license agreement or use a pre-made one that I have handy. But I've learned my lessons in my past about protecting my rights. And so this person was then telling me afterwards, yes, they were of course going to put this online, and they were actually going to put this like everywhere as their single. And so I said, well, wait a minute, this is not what you had posted, and this is not what we agreed upon. I'm not doing that for $20. And I got such a long tirade of very unkind, angry responses on me pulling the plug on that, that I was like, wow. I mean, like, sure, maybe this was just, you know, an angry person. This is a one case study. But this has happened on so many like projects by now for me where, you know, the work starts and then somehow negotiation starts over again, where I'm like, well, first of all, that's no way of conducting business. But, you know, renegotiating under consent is an option, I think. Everybody agrees to that. And so my conclusion is like, yeah, it really, like, it baffles me. It has to be that a lot of people really don't know how much work it is, you know, where it often gets passed off as this small thing. Oh, this was just some drums and a guitar. And it's like, yeah, most of it were like samples and loops and stuff. But I still worked, I don't know, 8 hours, 10 hours on putting that together. And sure, I went in knowing I was going to just make $20. So a lot of it was just the fun of it for me. I wanted to do this. But I don't think that's a reason for anybody to like underappreciate what goes into it. And I think that's just like a rampant, almost like epidemic in the media industry, where it's like everything's just meet our budget, everything's cheaper, everything. It's like this massive commodification of what we do. But commodification, not even because it doesn't really actually get assigned the value of time and effort and learning and hours that gets put into. So yeah, I vote for, how about, you know, we get people who have tiny budgets to actually pitch to us and give us a reason to want to do their project, because there is a lot of cool projects out there that I don't pitch for because I know they can't pay anything. But I also think a lot of those cool projects do deserve a great composer on them or a great instrumentalist or whatever it is that they need. But I think this gap that happens in culture where we're seen as, I don't know what, that needs to go away, because all of you know it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and I think most of us probably put in more hours than we charge. Absolutely.
I think one of the biggest problems is particularly in this day and age, where we do it alone. You know, editors are sitting next to the director. They're seeing the hours that are being put in and stuff. I always say that at cast and crew, you can always spot the composer because they're the ones standing on their own in a corner with no friends. We're part of the crew, part of the post-production crew, but it's a solitary existence. And you know, that's one of the reasons why I think if you can, you know, get on projects early and get down to the set, get on location, make friends with the editor, make friends with the sound department, and become part of the crew, I think helps to value. But it's just like the knife edge I was talking about. And Charles, I'll come to you in a second. Actually, what you mentioned, Merlin, reminds me of something that Charles said several podcasts ago, which is, I'm going to misquote you, Charles, but it's, you know, reciprocity. It's about show me the enthusiasm that you have for me working on this job. How are you going to represent that? But it is a knife edge, because, you know, I was working with a composer on a really, really big project, and they made life difficult for a lot of people. And I just kept on saying to this person, you've just got to be aware of the opportunity cost as well. You push it so far, but if you get the sense that these people, their hands are tied, this is the budget that they have, and they just don't have any more money, you know, ask by all means. You've just got to weigh up whether there's going to be an opportunity cost, and becoming a pain in the arse is the worst possible outcome, because it's a tiny industry and word gets out. But what I also noticed is this composer was a woman, and I think it's far easier to say where women are concerned, you know, and I don't know if Mandy's still here and has any thoughts about this. Women are difficult. Men are kind of hard-nosed, and you know what I mean? I think that there is this slight imbalance with the genders of when Topliners, who more than not is one of the few areas of the technical side of the music industry where there are more women than men, are often called difficult, whereas men, that's not a word they afford them. Charles, I'm waffling.
The term I think you are referring to as depth of enthusiasm. Let me go back to some remarks that Merlin made. Number one, now this may be because I'm just an old man and I've got a lot of quote unquote combat experience in the industry, not just as an actor, but in voiceover and in music in some instances. I have come to regard these things as, this question would come to mind: is this going to be an important strategic alliance between me and the client? And therefore, as far as I'm concerned, the interview is a two-way street. And I think the solution that I have been utilizing is really pretty firm. I established the protocols up front. If I do this, this is what is going to, these are my fees. Now, I don't mean like dollars, but these are my fees. We talk about the rights up front, the usage, et cetera, and so forth. If there's any ambiguity, it's got to be settled at the beginning. I learned it pretty early in my life, but I can think of a very significant time. This had to do with the death of my mother, as a matter of fact. And we had an occasion, the Kallenberg family had some property. And when she died, there was an equal division of the estate between my brother and me. And he called me up and he said, do you mind if I had a mortgage drawn up on this particular piece of property. And he called me up, he said, look, I don't understand the stock market. Would you take the stock portfolio and can I have the property? I said, yeah, you can have the property. It didn't make any difference to me. My brother and I had a good, clean relationship. There, we never had any contentiousness about it. So anyway, to speed the story forward, maybe 5 or 6 years later, he called me up and he said, so-and-so called me and he's got a tax issue with the state of Florida, because that's where the property was, and he wants to talk to you. I said, well, why do you want to talk to me? You're the owner of the mortgage. He said, I don't understand the lingo. Would you talk to him? I said, okay. So here's really the lesson, I think. I indulged my brother because I loved him, and I said, okay. I called the guy. I said, what is the difficulty? He said, well, the state of Florida sent me this, and he went into this pageant of difficulties, which basically had to do with he had to pay taxes because he had made a side agreement with someone that I didn't make an agreement with. And he said, wouldn't you write a letter, blah, 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 blah. And I said, I'm not going to use the last name. I said, Jeffrey, the contract was drawn up at the time and signed by both of us, correct? Yes. What is the contract for? Well, don't you remember I talked about that? I said, Jeffrey, the contract is the memory. I don't think about it anymore. I don't care I don't care if so-and-so said such and such or whatever. The contract acts as a memory, so we don't have to think about what the hell we talked about during the time of the negotiation. So I think what I'm saying, Merlin, and anybody else who cares to indulge in this pageant of mine, make it clear up front. This is how I work. I think, and I've used this term, and it's not arrogance. This is on behalf of all of us, because I think we're talking to everybody here who's been in the gunfights, if you please. When people challenge what you say you want, you simply say, let me make it clear. When you involve me. You are paying for experience and results. And if you don't want that, my calendar is active with other people. So it's your choice. And then you shut up, if you know what I mean. I've lost work that way. I don't care. I've gained work that way. And I don't even care there because I don't take it personally, even if I get a gig, because it's about the results, if that makes sense. So I don't know if that little homily is going to be helpful, but I think it's just a matter of making your protocols very clear up front so that no one at the back end can come back and say, well, you know, what I really want to do is blah, 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 blah. And I had that happen with a singer in LA who decided to do something. And then she got mad at me and actually said, you're ruining my career. I said, no, I'm not ruining your career. You ruined your own career. And you're trying to pass the blame off on me because you made a decision and never consulted me in the first place. It's your problem. Don't blame me. Yeah. No, I'll shut up.
No, thank you for that, Charles. And before I come back to you, Dex, I think that, you know, certainly from a business point of view, if you compare, say, for example, when we would release Labs and Spitfire, they were always free. There was never a value attached to them. So as a consequence, for many people, they were valueless. When we released the BBC thing that we did, and we said this is worth 49 quid, but we're going to give it away for free, it was like a bank run, because there was an idea of the discount, even if the discount was 100%. And I think that there is probably a way that isn't uncouth, particularly with producers, to let them know that if you have, in this instance, done them a favour because you believe in the project or you have a relationship with the director or you're looking forward to a future relationship with them, to make them aware of the monetary discount that they're getting. And it shouldn't be in percent, it should be in pounds or dollars. You know, this really, is, I'm giving you 15,000 quid here. And I just think to put a number on it, it stimulates their sense of, it's amazing, we got this amazing composer, and usually, their fee would be 15,000, but they believed in this project so much they did it for free, as opposed to, we just managed to get this composer to do it for free. He's exactly the same thing, but also completely different. And I think there's a way of doing that in a way that's tasteful and polite, but to actually name your price, even if that's not the price that you're getting. You know, builders do it all of the time. You know, this is your discount. It's 100%, but usually this would cost $20,000 or whatever. The other thing I want to say is there is no word more profitable in my mind that I have experienced, if there's a single word, than the word no. And it's the word we have real difficulty saying. And I had a real sage, someone who I'm very close to now, say to me, probably about 15 years ago, I'd just come through the ringer. I'd been called in as the cavalry on this series that the composer, basically, he had one of those crunches we talked about. I ended up with the gig. I didn't sleep to do this thing. The series was hugely successful. It got a big Hollywood deal, this, that, and the other. And from that, they approached me about doing a major franchise, like one of the biggest kind of television exports this country has produced. And they asked me to pitch for it. And I remember sharing with my friend over coffee, I remember where it was, Patisserie Valerie on Old Compton Street. I remember saying, I just feel totally insulted after doing such a tremendous job. That when this series came out, the producer sent me just this massive bouquet of flowers to thank me. It wasn't because I worked for free. It's just because I worked my arse off for it. And I said, I just don't think it's good for me if I pitch for this. I think it devalues what I'm capable of, what I've proven to them. And it was a very similar genre to the genre that I'd just done. So she said to me, just say no. And it's the first time in my life I'd ever done that. I said no, and the contract was on the table the following day. And there's something about stimulating FOMO, and that's by generating value in yourself and your services. So it doesn't work all of the time. But what are you going to do instead of working for free? Well, if you like golf, you can go and play a game of golf, go surfing, get a better job, spend some time with your family, as opposed to working for free on something that you're getting exploited for, with maybe some promise that there'll be work in the future, which is something that, particularly with directors, they cannot promise you. I've always said it's very similar to if you're working on the go-kart thing, and you change this driver's tires for a couple of years for free, and they promise you if they're going to go places, they're going to take you with them. Suddenly they get promoted to Formula One, and they say, can my friend change the tires? I'm not telling them to fuck off. They've moved up to upper level. They're not going to, the producers are not going to give you this gig. I think that we base our hopes and ambitions on a couple of very, very famous relationships with directors and composers, namely Steven Spielberg and John Williams. These are rarities, and composers, they move up a level. If you look at Christopher Nolan, he had a relationship with a British-based composer for 2 or 3 of his major early films. But when he moved up that level, he has to move up a level with heads of department as well. So that is not a promise people can make you, and I think I would be very, very wary of that. Not speaking negatively, it's just the truth. But definitely I did this franchise, and it was the best job I ever did, and it was a job I said no to. So that was a real lesson learned, and I wish it was something that I have repeated since, but it's a very, very difficult word to say. Dex?
I was just going to mention a very positive point, which is working. I do working with music libraries and putting out music to them, and there are good guys out there. I'm recently working with a library, so you've got the standard 50-50 split, and they are working with Warner Brothers. And a lot of libraries have said, well, we need some of that composer royalty. This library is just taking the hit on the composer, splitting it with Warner Brothers, and I still get the technically 100% writers, composers share. So there are good guys out there. You don't need to take a bad deal.
No, I totally agree. And often it's good guys offering you the bad deal, and that's something you need to watch out for. If their back's against the wall, and it's just where we sit in the post-production schedule, there's no money left ever. Once, however, on just a more positive note, once I was working on a production. I think I can say this out loud. It was Tutankhamun. I made a video of me doing the score with a massive orchestra. This was a synth-only score. That's all they could afford. But they shot it all in South Africa. And during that year, the Rand collapsed. But they'd finished shooting there. But suddenly, they had £100,000 in extra cash that they weren't expected because that currency collapsed. And they said, would you like an orchestra? I think it was probably the first and last time that is ever likely to happen to me. If you actually haven't checked it out, if you go to the Spitfire YouTube channel, there's this thing, and it's scoring Tutankhamun. The reason I bring it up and promote this video is the reason I made it was to prove what you can accomplish in a single 3-hour session with a British band. And whilst these opportunities in places like Budapest and stuff are excellent, yeah, it's a fly on the wall is, literally cameras, microphone. It's like there's been 700,000 views of this video, and it's 3 hours long. And I watch it from time to time because my deceased dad pops up and is all proud in the background sometimes, and it's lovely to see him. But yeah, it's so I mean, you get these great deals in Budapest and this, that, and the other, but also what you can achieve in America and in the UK with the quality of musicianship and instruments and microphones and technical expertise. All of this goes into creating a very, very smooth process to deliver what is totally unexpected. On working with musicians, you know, a good example would be working with a cellist and you've written a part where you want them to play 2 notes double stopped, and they turn to you and they say, it'll sound a lot better if you just do me over 2 takes. You say back to them, well, I can't afford that because I have to pay you twice because I'm double tracking you. Often the cellist will go, it doesn't matter. And for me, where musicians are concerned, I've talked to them about exploitation, whether they just say it's not cut and dry. It's when you walk out of a session, if you feel exploited, if people have taken the piss, that's exploitation. It's not necessarily by the lay of the land. And, you know, I think provided, and I'm not suggesting this, you know, the MU would be very angry with me, but provided you do things pretty much to the rule of the law with a union, if you and the musician come to a private arrangement to maybe double track a few bits or go a bit longer, then that's great. That's the musician understanding the power of opportunity. So on that note, I think I'm going to leave it today. I will be joining you from France next week, and the producer and moderator of this podcast, Simon and I've done it wrong way around, Alan and Simon. I can't actually see them. We've just got this bank of screens now. I can see some hands waving above me. Great. It's great to see that Alan hasn't needed to take a WAS this week. That's been a feature of the last couple of podcasts. But also, I just want to let you know that I haven't taken up drinking again. It's really fucking hot in this room. We don't have aircon. It's the UK. I'm nudging up against 11 months sober, which is great. And support to any of you guys who have been through a similar experience. But yeah, this is not the red wine. This is just the unseasonably hot weather in Scotland and a lack of air conditioning. That's the proof. So yeah, I just value what you do, value your time, and work out what you want to do with your time and what you want from life. I've had this happen to me over the last couple of years. It's you look at this, you know, a lot of these big box set, you know, series, you got kind of ask yourself, I'm going to be on this for 2 years. Are these people lovely people? Is this project a lovely project? Am I going to be stimulated artistically by this project? I'm 53, possibly may want to retire when I'm 65. 2 years of that is going to be a large percentage of my remaining professional career. So just think about what you want as well, what you want to get out of it. And if they're going to pay you fuck all, but it's going to be a bloody good laugh, go ahead and do it. But just tell them what the discount is. On that note, lots of love to you all. I'm going to see you from France next week. Sorry, I didn't finish the thing that the guys said. They said, is the internet connection going to be good? And I said, well, it's 40 minutes drive from Geneva, where CERN is. That's where they fucking invented the internet, so I would hope so. I can run an Ethernet cable along from Geneva. So on that sweary note, apologies for my French. I'm just practicing for my trip abroad. Lots of love. See you next time. Have another go at the Composer Challenge, and sorry that we couldn't find a winner.
If you feel like you are losing a grip, might suffer a trip or abandon ship, open a can of